It's 8 o'clock.
Good morning. This is Northern Light for Thursday, October 5th. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Todd Moe.
Most U.S. hospitals are part of larger healthcare networks. Our Champlain Valley reporter, Kara Chapman, takes a look at how that's played out for Plattsburgh's hospital.
Folks depend on us. The community, the region depends on us. And I think if it wasn't for the network and the ability to be able to connect together, we'd have to be really asking ourselves, like, how big can we be and what can we do?
The latest installment of our healthcare series coming up.
Intense heat and extreme weather due to climate change has made farming in New York more dangerous for workers.
Should I stop working? No. If you don't have any health, how will you provide for your family?
And an art curator in Canton hopes her exhibit can connect North Country gallery goers with social justice issues in rural India.
Is the place of in-betweenness a place of discomfort, or is it a place that actually inspires?
All of that is coming up on Northern Light. Stick with us.
Broadcast of Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio is supported by Gray and Gray and Associates, CPAs, an accounting and financial services firm in northern New York with offices in Canton, Potsdam, and Spring Hill, Florida. GrayCPAS.com. And by AdirondackExplorer.com and AdirondackAlmanac.com, presenting daily updated news on public policy, environmental issues, local communities in the Adirondack Park.
This is Northern Light. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Todd Moe. More than 2/3 of the 6,100 hospitals in the United States are part of a larger healthcare network. Supporters of what's known as regionalization say it helps smaller hospitals save on equipment and recruit physicians and other staff to the regions where they provide care. But critics, including some healthcare workers and patients, say it erodes the role of a local hospital in the community. For a series on healthcare, our Champlain Valley reporter Kara Chapman takes a look at how merging with the network has played out for Plattsburgh's hospital.
About 20 people are gathered roundtable style in the Plattsburgh Hampton Inn's conference room. They're here for a town hall hosted by the New York State Nurses Association. That's the union that represents a lot of the North Country's hospital nurses.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Vicki, and I have lived my entire life in the North Country.
That's Vicki Davis Corson, a nurse and one of the union leaders at Champlain Valley Physicians Hospital, or CVPH, in Plattsburgh.
I'm here to welcome you to our town hall about access to care in the North Country.
Davis Corson and others in the union say there's a crisis in healthcare staffing and basic services, a decline in maternity, intensive care, and pediatric beds. Researcher Siobhan Rosenthal ties those issues to a phenomenon that swept across the U.S. healthcare system.
So you can see that almost every hospital consolidated into a larger health system.
Consolidation, regionalization, partnership. It goes by different names depending on who's talking about it. But the basic premise is that a smaller, often rural hospital becomes part of a larger city-based network that shares resources with its members. CVPH is one of the North Country's biggest hospitals. It's also one of 3 in northern New York that joined the University of Vermont Health Network over the last 10 years, along with the ones in Elizabethtown and Malone. Officials say before the network formed, Burlington's hospital and CVPH didn't have the greatest relationship. Dr. John Brumstead, the network's first leader who retired last December, says it was competitive and contentious.
It was sort of the overlap between University of Vermont Medical Center, then called Fletcher Allen Healthcare, as an academic medical center, and CVPH being one of the largest hospitals in the North Country, trying to provide all the services that they could.
But Brumstead says CVPH simply didn't have the volume of patients to maintain certain specialties on this side of the lake, like open heart surgery. He says low patient volumes make it hard for smaller rural hospitals to offer such services in an affordable, high-quality way. And he says it's virtually impossible to run these facilities without extra government support.
And so more and more across the country, systems are developing, and particularly in rural areas, hospitals are either closing or cutting way back on services, or they're becoming part of systems of care like the UVM Health Network.
Brumstead says attitudes about coming together were mixed, but the boards at CVPH and other hospitals understood the potential that forming a network had for preserving and improving access to care. And he says things moved pretty quickly. Meetings and negotiations started in early 2012, and CVPH joined the network in January 2013. Smaller hospitals have a tough time recruiting doctors and nurses, and they often don't have the buying power for the equipment and other cutting-edge technologies needed in today's healthcare landscape. Michelle LeBeau is CVPH's president. She says being part of the network has helped the hospital do things like acquire personal protective equipment for staff during COVID and fill in gaps in staff coverage.
What I'm appreciative of and grateful for is that we actually have a partner to call to say, I've only got coverage for 3 days. What can you do to support me?
But some employees aren't so satisfied. Chris Swise is a nurse who's worked at CVPH for more than 20 years. He says he noticed smaller changes when the hospital first joined the network. But over the last few years, he says those have given way to big changes, like switching the medical record system and the loss of more and more services. Swise also says it seems like CVPH is losing its autonomy.
One of our big slogans, our big things that we used to run by was, quality healthcare close to home. And, I really felt that we really strived here at CVPH and at Plattsburgh to do that.
Now, he says it seems like they just tell patients to go elsewhere for their care. Kate Trombley is a Plattsburgh resident who's very familiar with traveling for health care. Her 2 youngest children, Rory and Reed, are, as she says, medically complex. Between the 2 of them, they have all sorts of conditions, like clubfoot, heart defects, and a skull condition. Rory was also recently diagnosed with autism.
The list of specialists that my children see is phenomenal. It's sad. It's frustrating. We've traveled to Albany. We traveled to Montreal. We've traveled to Dartmouth. We've traveled to Boston Children's.
And they regularly travel back and forth across the lake to the UVM Medical Center's pediatric department. Trombley says she tends to avoid CVPH, even for emergency care. That's partially because of negative experiences she says she's had there, but also because the hospital doesn't have a pediatric unit and the specialists her children need.
It's very difficult to have medically complex children, and I know I'm not the only one in this community that feels this way and feels very strongly about it, to have medically complex children and not have what you need right here in case of emergency or just basic care.
LeBeau says she appreciates that people have to travel for care, and as a mother of 5, has felt the gap in coverage with her own family. She says CVPH has pediatricians for maternity and the emergency room, but she says there simply aren't enough patients to attract pediatric specialists like the ones Trombley's children see.
They want to see large volumes, and so we leverage our friends across the lake where they see large volumes from across northern New York and then from across Vermont.
Some nurses see how that makes sense. Shane Camp is a traveling nurse who's worked on and off in CVPH's emergency department over the last few years. He says consolidating can help a hospital's finances, and there are some perks to being part of a network, like quicker transfers of patients to higher levels of care. But he personally thinks that regionalization can hurt local patients when valuable resources move out of town.
The medical professional in me says, if somebody comes to CVPH for chest pain and it turns out that they need an open, heart bypass, they should be able to have it at CVPH.
The jury's out on how the creation of these networks affects quality of care. Allie Coates is a PhD candidate whose research focuses on small rural hospitals who become part of larger health systems. She says there's not a lot of research on the impacts, and the research that does exist is mixed. Coates says rural hospitals have faced existential financial threats for years and are closing at alarming rates. Those that remain have pared back services or changed their federal reimbursement models.
But I think in a lot of cases, these affiliations happen because people feel like the administrators feel like there isn't a choice. They want to serve their communities, and they can do it with a little help.
Michelle LeBeau, CVPH's president, says she constantly has to ask herself where the hospital would be without the UVM Health Network. She says it'd probably be like one of those facilities Coates was talking about.
Folks depend on us. The community, the region depends on us. And I think if it wasn't for the network and the ability to be able to connect together, we'd have to be really asking ourselves, like, how big can we be and what can we do?
LeBeau says that some of the next steps in the collaboration are still works in progress. Things like doctor and nurse recruitment and making sure everyone has the resources they need for patients. Back at the union presentation, Chris Wise, the longtime CVPH nurse, says the network has to make those things work.
You know, they need to do better in getting us the care that we need so that we can get people to come into the North Country who want to stay here, who want to take root, who want to raise their families up here like we do because we love this area and we care for it. And healthcare is a big driver for getting people to come in here.
Swise says any big change comes with growing pains, and he's frustrated right now. But he says he's hopeful things will settle down and that CVPH will get the doctors, nurses, and resources it needs to care for its patients. Kara Chapman, North Country Public Radio, Plattsburgh.
You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio. It's 8:11. Good morning. I'm Todd Moe.
And I'm Monica Sandreski. Coming up, the exhibit at the Brush Art Gallery in Canton is exploring what poor artists in rural India are saying about social justice issues. Environment, Health, and the Body features the work of contemporary outsider artists from India. And we'll hear more from curator Chandray Basu coming up.
Broadcast of Northern Light is supported by Cronin's Golf Resort, offering golfers the opportunity to experience the fall foliage. Details at croninsgolfresort.com. And the Alzheimer's Disease Caregiver Support Initiative, now offering on-demand training from Care Academy. Enhance your caregiving skills while earning certificates. Learn more at wehelpcaregivers.com. This is music by Evan Veenstra in Gananoque, Ontario. Check out more of his music on our website, ncpr.org/_.
Intense heat and extreme weather due to climate change has made farming in New York more dangerous for workers. Farm workers are now looking for ways to be prepared before disaster strikes. WSHU's Ada Uzenlar reports.
Heat waves, hurricanes, and extreme air quality conditions are just a few hurdles that farm workers on Long Island face in their work. Even when a climate event isn't sudden, there are times when workers don't have the resources or preparation to stay healthy.
A person who is working 60 hours a week in greenhouses feels like they're in a sauna because when it's 90 degrees outside, under that plastic, it's like 110 degrees, and they have no breaks. What can a person do against that?
That's Margaret Palmquist. She organizes with a local labor union. Legislation went into effect in 2020, legalizing the right for New York farm workers to collectively negotiate for equitable housing and working conditions. New York is one of only 14 states to allow this type of union to form at all. Now, farm workers say that they want to feel prepared for their changing working environment. Former nursery farm worker Yadira Vasquez says that preparedness can foster resilience that protects health long term.
Should I stop working? No. We have to work because we have orders to fill. Workers don't see how this will affect them. Not right now, but in the future. If you don't have any health, how will you provide for your family?
Gladys Carrillo directs program services at the National Center for Farm Worker Health in Texas. Before that, she was a farm worker with her family in Illinois. She says a farm worker's increased awareness of their health is important to the whole family.
Being healthy allows them to be able to spend more time together, to be able to live longer, and to be able to have those memories that really are priceless when it comes down to it.
Carrillo says a farm worker's boss is immediately responsible for ensuring their health.
Employers really are pivotal in terms of having a healthy workforce.
And OSHA guidelines from the federal government require it. But Carrillo says employers don't always fulfill their duties. Vasquez shares from experience.
Owners want the workers to do their jobs. They're obviously not going to tell them that the weather is bad for their health.
Carrillo says when employers don't cut it, there are other organizations that can step in, from nonprofits like Rural and Migrant Ministry to houses of worship such as the North Fork Spanish Apostolate, and educators like Cornell Cooperative Extension. And now, labor unions. But some migrant and seasonal farm workers on Long Island aren't documented and can make engaging with a farm worker union a lot more complicated. Marianne Trasciatti is a labor expert at Hofstra University.
All of that is made even more intense when the workers who are considering organizing or maybe actually engaging in organizing are undocumented, right? Because they're just way more vulnerable.
Especially if there is a constant threat of retaliation from an employer. Undocumented workers still have resources. Trasciatti says people trust the information they hear through those they're close to the most.
You're actually, believe it or not, more likely to heed information that comes from a friend or a trusted source than from even an authority figure. And if you think about the vulnerability that many migrant workers find themselves in, it's no surprise that they might not trust authority figures.
Trasciatti's advice in community organizing is to identify a common leader who can communicate quickly and effectively. Identify people with reliable transportation. Learn who has the best command of English in emergencies. She says it's about coming together to form a collective.
The strength of the labor movement, historically, now, and forever, is solidarity.
Trasciatti sees the kind of resilience that farm workers are seeking as a flexible strength, one that can bend but won't break. And it's stronger together. For North Country Public Radio, I'm Ada Uzenlar.
This story was created in collaboration with 2 Prensa Local. Check out WSHU's new series, Sound Science, where you can find the full story with a comprehensive list of resources for farm workers in English and in Spanish at WSHU.org.
A candidate running for the Jefferson County Legislature has been accused of sexually harassing a former female co-worker, according to court documents. The Watertown Daily Times reports Christopher Bolio used to run St. Lawrence County's Human Resources Department. He allegedly sexually harassed another county employee. He denied the allegations to the Times and called the filing extortion. The plaintiff filed a complaint with the state Supreme Court saying that Bolio would ask her to come to his apartment for dinner and drinks. The plaintiff alleges Bolio once tried to touch her stomach and made sexual comments. The plaintiff says she repeatedly rejected his advances. The plaintiff is seeking 2 civil charges, one for intentional infliction of emotional distress and assault and battery.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection might be looking at a new site for a Border Patrol station in the North Country. The Watertown Daily Times reports the spot is a field on Heaslip Lane and Hayes Road between Clayton and Fisher's Landing. Another site on Blind Bay has drawn stiff opposition from green groups, local residents, and Senator Chuck Schumer. They argue it's too environmentally sensitive. This property is bordered by seasonal cottages and small homes. Former Clayton Town Supervisor David Storant owns and manages a cottage property and said he was approached in the early summer by people asking to evaluate the property and do an environmental assessment, but he doesn't know what their plans are. According to the Times, the CBP wouldn't confirm if the Clayton property is being considered.
St. Lawrence County Social Services will be getting more than $300,000 for the New York State Rental Supplement Program. North Country Now reports it'll provide rental assistance to individuals and families who are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of losing their housing. The county's legislators approved the allocation at a recent board meeting. The funds are directed to be used for use between April of this year until next March, and it can be rolled over until the funds are gone. You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio. I'm Todd Moe.
And I'm Monica Sandreski. Coming up in just a minute, we'll meet the mad scientist of music performing in Elizabethtown this weekend. Then stick around after the show for Bird Note. Autumn brings many species of wintering ducks and seabirds to our waters. Some dabble along the surface, and others like to dive underwater. We'll hear more coming up at 8:42. But first, Todd has a look at the weather for us.
A mix of sun and clouds today with a high around 80 this afternoon. Light winds out of the south, becoming mostly cloudy tonight, lows around 60. And then about a 50-50 chance of rain tomorrow. Friday's highs mid-70s. And a good chance of rain and some heavy rain showers throughout the day on Saturday with highs in the 60s, lows in the 50s, and then a good chance of showers continuing Sunday and into early next week as well. Highs in the 50s on Sunday and highs upper 40s, low 50s on Monday. So we're going from highs near 80 today to highs near 50 on Monday. Right now in Canton, 68 degrees.
An art exhibit in Canton is exploring what poor artists in rural India are saying about social justice issues. Environment, Health, and the Body at the Brush Art Gallery features the work of 35 contemporary Indians who are operating outside of the mainstream art world. I met up with Chandray Basu at the gallery.
Hi, how are you doing?
She's an art history professor at St. Lawrence University and curated the exhibit. She has short salt and pepper hair and wears gold earrings and a blue peasant top.
Could you show us one of those pieces and describe it for us?
Yes, certainly. So one of the pieces here is chock-a-block full of different types of fish.
She's pointing at an unraveled scroll packed with olive green, orange, and white fish. It's the story of a fish wedding. At the top, the bride and groom ride in a carriage. Below, catfish and shrimp play the flute and the harmonium. This is a technique called Patua scroll painting. This piece is by Monimala Chitrakar. Poor Bengali men and women paint stories on scrolls and travel village to village singing the story while unraveling the scroll in exchange for food.
In the song, you hear each species of fish talking about what they're doing to make the celebration a success. They're all in it together. They're all happy.
Unravel the scroll more.
And then as you come down, you see the fish being pushed up towards the center. Some of them have lost their musical instruments.
And there's one big fish way down at the bottom.
A monstrous fish. It's a delicious fish, by the way.
And an aggressive fish with big teeth named Bawal.
It was not invited to the wedding. And he starts gobbling up all the fish.
The moral is that big fish eat small fish, corporations close out small family shops, people who are marginalized get trampled. And that's it. That's the end of the scroll. It's kind of bleak. All the paintings here deal with social inequities. AIDS plaguing a small village in the Bihar state.
They're completely immersed in passion, the passion of the body, the passion of the pleasure.
The Hindu goddess Kamleshwari protecting low-caste fishermen whose livelihood has been threatened by the government's flood mitigation projects.
Look at that huge nose ring she's wearing. Do you see how that ends in a fish?
And harassing young brides over dowries.
It's almost like an execution.
Basu says many of these artists are not activists in so many words. They're painting from personal experience within their own regional painting traditions. Most of these works are by people who have collectivized politically under one caste called Dalit, what we in the U.S. have referred to in the past as the untouchables. The Dalit have traditionally been excluded from galleries in urban Indian communities. Basu says curating this exhibit has brought her to reflect on her own experience growing up in Bengal.
Oh, it's made me so much aware of my privilege.
She was educated in elite Western schools and says for a long time she felt kind of clueless to issues marginalized communities in Bengal deal with.
I've, throughout my life, made political decisions. Yes, the poor. But those are all very general categories. But working with these individual specific artists and their artworks have really made me connect in a very special way to their stories, to their individual contexts.
She wants the exhibit to give gallery goers the opportunity to connect issues in India to our own community and the local artists who interpret them.
In light of what happened from 2017, 2018, the Black Lives Matter movement, it's not just enough to look artists from India, oh cool. It's very important to see that you can use their work and literally create a dialogue that is not necessarily the dialogue that the artists themselves are creating.
In the heart of the gallery is a long scroll. It's another Bengali patua scroll, like the fish we saw earlier. It starts up at the ceiling and rolls down onto the floor. Basu and I step around it, and she points up at the top. This is called I See the Promised Land. It's a biography of Martin Luther King and is set in India. Rosa Parks is wearing a sari, and in one scene, a handful of people hold up signs in Bengali.
They all say, I have a dream. We have dreams too. I have a dream.
Basu hopes gallery goers reflect on King's vision that whether in India or in the North Country, our lives and our futures are all bound together. Monica Sandreski, North Country Public Radio, Canton. You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio. I'm Monica Sandreski here with Todd Moe, and we want to let you know about a couple of the events going on throughout the region, including some of the live music. The repertoire of the composer performing in Elizabethtown this weekend is a candy shop of works, or so says Rose Chancellor. She's a classically trained pianist and founder of the venue Piano by Nature.
I also like active listening music, stuff that just gets you going inside.
Enter Dennis Batory-Kitz. He's a Hungarian-American composer and a music tech professor based in Vermont.
And he's this rogue. He's this absolute rogue. I like to refer to him as the mad scientist of music because I picture him in his little lab, mixing up sounds.
DBK, as he's called, has composed more than 1,000 pieces in his 60 years in music, from classical to electronic music and dance music. He uses non-traditional instruments like the ukulele. We're listening to his piece Water, No Fire right now, which features a guitar and a bass recorder. DBK's pieces also incorporate the theremin. That's an electronic instrument from the 1920s where the performer doesn't even touch the instrument. There's just sensors from an antenna.
And they just cover the gamut of everything you can imagine he comes up with. I mean, he's one of the most curious musical minds I've ever met in all the years I've been around. And he's done it mostly on his own.
DBK is primarily self-taught, but studied under the electroacoustic composer Clarence Barlow at the Royal Conservatory of The Hague. Chancellor's excited for audience goers to get into something so unusual.
So this is just a musically curious kind of thing, right? But why wouldn't everybody be musically curious? I just want them to come with an open mind and say, oh, I had no idea that existed, or wow, or maybe I really hate that song. Oh, but I love that one. I think it will have all of that.
The performance includes a whole crew of North Country musicians. Jane Boxall from Lewis on marimba and percussion, NCPR's Taylor Haskins in Westport, Amy Nelson from Keene on voice, Marilyn Reynolds from Rouse's Point on violin, Janine Sherlin and Todd Prey from Peru, and Margalie Grenier and Robin Cameron Phillips from Plattsburgh. There's 3 shows this weekend. You can find out more at pianobynature.org.